I first spoke to Professor Jordan B Peterson at the beginning of 2018. We talked about many things: hate crime, feminism, the far right. But one thing that really struck me, and him, was when we started to talk about the plight of young men.
I was at this talk I gave, and about 1,000 people came, and about 500 of them stayed afterwards, and most of them were young men, and just one of them after the other comes up to me, and they shake my hand, and they say, "Look, I've been listening to what you've been saying for 6 months, and it's changed my life. It's like I was depressed, I was addicted to drugs, my relationships weren't working out, I was hopeless, I didn't have any goal. I started cleaning up my room and telling the truth and working hard on myself, and it's really working, and I just want to thank you for helping me." And I think, God, it's so sad that so many of these men, they've not had an encouraging bloody word, a real encouraging word in their entire life. It just takes a little bit of encouragement and care so that they're willing to set themselves straight to some degree and start trying. It's just a catastrophe that's so rare in their lives.
We wanted to see what would happen if we took Professor Peterson to a place which is associated with masculinity, associated with tough lives, but with discipline and with order. So we took him to Moss Side Fire Station Boxing Club in Manchester. And Moss Side has a notorious aura around it. We started off by playing that clip that you've just heard of Professor Peterson getting very, very upset when talking about the plight of young men. And I started off by asking him if he felt much had changed since we last spoke.
On a very regular basis, daily basis, wherever I am now, people come up to me, and it's often men, and tell me the same sort of stories that I laid out in that clip, that they've decided to develop something approximating a vision for their life and to adopt more responsibility and to straighten themselves out, and that they can see why that's necessary, because you can't just do it. You also have to see why it's necessary, because it takes effort to forego immediate gratification and resentment and aggression and short-term status seeking, let's say, to put something away for the future. You have to understand that you have a moral obligation to do that. That's paramount. And partly what I'm trying to do is to provide people with an explanation that carries them through the difficulties. Because I do believe that every person who doesn't bring forth their potential into the world leaves a gap that's filled by something that's not good. And not good for anyone, not good for them, not good for their families, not good for the culture. And it's a real problem. And I believe that is the case for every single person. And so,
have you become more emotionally robust towards the plight of young men, or does it upset you as deeply now as it did then? Do you need to be more emotionally robust towards it?
No, I don't think I need to be. I think that I don't think there's anything good about it. I can't tell you how deeply I detest the idea that a series of ideas, that our culture is a oppressive patriarchy. That's the best way to conceptualize it, and that the appropriate way to view history is the endless domination of women by men over the course of the last several thousands of years, and that any attempt by young men to manifest any ambition or competence is equivalent to power, and all they're doing is taking their place in the pathological culture. All of that to me is it's one-sided to start with, but I think it's appalling beyond description. And so, no, I certainly haven't become any less repelled by that. And the fact that I also know more clearly than I did when we talked to what degree that's a minority view. I mean, there was a good political science study published a week and a half ago or so that the Atlantic Monthly commented on, showing that only 8% of Americans hold the ideological position that would push that view forward, and even 30% of them think that it's gone too far. And so not only do we have this insane narrative that's driven by ignorance and resentment, but it's generated by a tiny minority of people many of whom themselves even believe that it's gone too far.
Going back to the clip that we played of you, and when I heard that, it resonated with me for some time. And then I came to this place. I visited it because Nigel Travis, who's sitting there, who runs Moss Side Fire Station boxing gym, he came on my show and then he said, come down here. And it took me about a year to come down here. Sorry, Nigel, it did take a while. And then I came here and then I thought, what he is doing is not dissimilar to what you're saying. In fact, it's quite close to what you're saying. Responsibility and meaning. That's what we need. Not just men, not just young men. We all need that in our lives. But Nigel saves young men. There's two of them here, Connor and Hamden here. And he came in and I saw what he was saying to them and how he spoke to them to bring them order. A sense outside of the chaos that when you come in here, the very strict set of rules, maybe more than 12. And I thought that it would be brilliant to bring a selection of men from different backgrounds for you to have a conversation with them. Nigel, I'd love to, for you and Professor Peterson or Jordan, to have a conversation simply because there are things that you share. Tell me about, what is your philosophy that you bring here?
Our gym is built on respect. The whole ethos of our gym is respect. And as you walk in our gym, there are 5 standards that you need to adhere to, and they are built around respect, respecting each other, respecting yourself, respecting the community, respecting the gym, and more importantly, the coaches, of which I am one. That's just people, the respect that they give to each other builds bridges between communities, gives credence to relationships that maybe they've never had and they've never been taught previously. So,
well, I really like the idea that you've combined boxing with that ethos, because one of the things that is typically and thoughtlessly put forward is the idea that male aggression, let's say, is something that should be inhibited or suppressed, or that perhaps boys should be socialized like girls, which I think is a dreadful idea. And in a boxing establishment, obviously the capacity for aggression is something that's not only allowed but developed, but it's brought under control. And I think that sophisticated psychologists understand, and sophisticated people understand, that you don't make men harmless by making them weak. You make them useful and responsible by helping them bring their capacity for mayhem and aggression under long-term, conscious, careful control. And that's part of the respect. One of the things about boxing, and this is true of any sport, I would say, is that you have to learn to take a blow and you have to learn to control your temper. And that's a big deal, because a lot of aggression, violent aggression goes astray when it's impulsive. And all the men that I've met who were worthy people had a tremendous capacity for aggression, but it was contained and controlled. And so then they could use it carefully and voluntarily when it needed to be used. And it gave them a certain amount of, I would say, dignity, but it also was part of what made other people around them respect them very, very rapidly. And I've seen this at every level of the hierarchy of different occupations, even very sophisticated occupations. And so to integrate that aggression is much, much, much better strategy than to try to repress it out of existence.
Well, it's worth at this point, Professor Peterson, actually speaking to two of the boxers that we have here, Connor and Hamden. What do you think, Connor, that boxing has given you? Actually, give us a sense of your background, if you don't mind, your family background, sure. and kind of where you've been.
So, I was, I got into boxing when I was 8 years old. I was struggling at school. I was physically good at stuff, but I couldn't mentally do it. And so my mum just thought she would bring me down to the gym, and it gave me from walking in the gym, the like everyone in the gym, it gave me like confidence.
Was there a father there when you were growing up?
No, it wasn't really. He wasn't that much around. Well, he was there, but he wasn't helping or doing nothing really.
Where was your model of? Where's a male role model then for you? Was there one until you walked into here?
Well, when I joined the gym, it was like my coaches were like father figures to me. I had someone to look up to. I said, firefighters, sort of really good role models, and yeah.
So why was it useful to you? Like when you came into the gym, what changed for you? You said it gave you confidence.
Well, they worked with me, so like I was finally good at something. I found something I was good at. So I wasn't good at writing and reading and all that. So in school I struggled. I used to punch the walls and stuff.
So you found something you were good at, and you had people paying attention to you for it and helping you develop that.
Yeah.
So that was a pathway forward for you that was positive.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Right. Well, it's unbelievably important for young people, well, for everyone, to find someone to pay attention to them. And, you know, attention is a funny thing, because if you really pay attention to someone, it's not like you're just being nice to them. That's foolish. What you want to do when you're paying attention to someone is help them separate the wheat from the chaff. You say, look, you know, when you did this, you didn't do it right, and here's why you didn't do it right, and here's what you could have done differently. And so it's better for you if you fix that. And then here's a bunch of things that you did that were really good, and you should do a bunch more of them. And, you know, then you know, when that happens to you, know that what you've done is important enough, your actions are important enough so that at least someone else attended to them. And that can give you confidence that what you're doing is worthwhile, as well as helping you, you know, hone your abilities and your skills.
Definitely.
And so how did that spill out into the rest of your life?
So it helped me, like, so my family, like, it helped me with other things as well. So not just the confidence and stuff. So in high school, I was struggling with my GCSEs, and I wanted to go to a boxing college. There's only like 5 around the country and stuff like that. And you needed a certain grade in English and maths. So I had to really work hard in those. If I wanted to continue in success in boxing, as doing boxing, and I wanted to go to this place, is I had to really
So that's a really good point too, because then, I mean, it's very unlikely that people will do difficult and disciplined things unless they have a goal.
Yeah.
Right? Because difficult and disciplined things are hard, whereas useless and like impulsively pleasurable things are easy. And so you need to have a goal. And so your story is, you know, people found, and you as well, found some things that you were good at. You had the opportunity to develop that. You could see that as a future that you actually wanted to attain, and that gave you the reason to discipline yourself. So how did that work out?
So it works. I did really well in my GCSEs. I passed where I thought I would have got. And
how come? What did you do differently?
I just got my head down, because I had a goal and I had it set, and I really wanted to get it done. So, and I don't. It just.
Right. Yeah, well, you need a goal, man.
Yeah.
You need a goal.
Yeah. And he's a national youth champion at boxing.
Uh-huh.
So he's a serious guy,
right?
In the boxing field. I mean, it's amazing. Hamdan, what about your story then?
I'm from the Manor, so around the corner from here. I only got into boxing, I'd say, 5 years ago properly. Where I'm from there's a massive football base for people, so I didn't really know of the gym very much. So every day I used to play football every single day, and I thought, I can't really go far with this because I wouldn't get the support from my parents. Even though both parents were there, they wouldn't let me, I'd say, take a risk, if you know what I mean. If I wanted to do football, and they wouldn't be like, right, we'll let you do football, everything, put all your eggs in one basket. They were down the more traditional route, go to university, study education, become a doctor, become an engineer. But
not a bad aspiration,
which is good, to be fair, which is good. But I feel like with me, I liked sport as well a lot. So once I started, when I was in high school, I met Connor. We were in the same high school, so we've been friends a long time. And then I used to see him travelling the world, going to New York, and I was like, I'm from the Manor, I won't be able to get to places like that. Let me walk down to the gym. So I got down to the gym, and it was like, it was an atmosphere. It was everyone just working down, heads down. Everyone was grafting, working hard, and they were rewarded for it. If you put the effort in, you'd get rewarded in it. And with me personally, I wouldn't say I was a bad kid who was struggling. I was an ideal student, but once I got angry, when something like kicked off, I'd really get angry. But with me for boxing, it was, if someone's allowed to punch you when you're in the ring, if someone's smacking your head and punching your face in, and they're allowed to do that. And if you can control your anger then you can do it anywhere else. So it was.
So you couldn't control your anger outside of it?
Once it went off, right. I just went off. But yeah, and coming in was like having people invest time and effort into me, and it made me feel like I've got to do that as well. So
right.
I'm a volunteer of the year. Like, I won this year.
Congratulations.
So cheers. Yeah, so I've just been giving back to the community, and because that's what I've in the last 5 years been given to me, the time, effort, getting the coaches to teach me how to box, doing very well, and so I just thought I'd have to give back to the community.
And so what's that done for you?
For me, it's given me a lot of confidence, because I've confidence to speak to kids, and I'll be able to say, look, if I can do what I'm doing and where I've come from my side, and where I'm from my side is there was a lot of gang-related activity, and it's like if you can't do something well, you've got to join them, like you said. So that was kind of the aspect of the community, and it was like loads of people were going into crime, and it was easy for everyone to go into crime, a lot easier. So for me, it was, once I came out the system of joining a gang, going out that route, and I found something I could do well in. And so once the club gave me opportunities to excel, for like we went to Brazil last year, which was a great experience. Kids were looking at me like, wow, he went to Brazil. I want to do that as well.
Right.
So it was like giving them another pathway. And then I was able to engage with the kids. We've been in schools and saying, listen, you don't have to go down that route. You have to take ownership of what you're going to do.
Yep.
You can either go left or you can go right.
Yeah.
So you have to take that ownership, and you've got to make sure you're doing the right decisions. So we've been to schools where there's a lot of kids that can go into gang-related activities, and we've been teaching them boxing, where telling them, listen, you can still do well, even though you've got no GCSEs. You can still thrive.
You still discipline yourself.
Yeah, discipline yourself.
Well, the thing is that young men need a gang. The question is what the gang is going to be.
Yeah.
You know, and it can be the local gang that isn't structured very well and that is getting into trouble all the time, or it can be a higher order gang that's associated with some long-term disciplined vision.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, everybody needs a community, and it's important for young people to learn how to interact with each other at a social level. And that's either going to be structured properly and intelligently towards some high-order goal, or it's going to be kind of chaotic and violent. But there's no getting away from it. I mean, the necessity for it.
Yeah.
Nigel, sorry, Professor Peterson. Nigel wanted to come back in.
Hamden's been a little bit humble there. He's from a Somali community which is pretty underrepresented in this area. Quite insular. A lot of the time they keep within the same communities. So Hamden's now branched out of that community into other communities, and he's actually building those bridges between communities. So people maybe from the Somali community who may not want to mix with other communities are looking at Hamden and thinking, well, it actually works, because they've seen, as he said, the success of where he's been before, and where he's going to in the future. So they see him, achieving in whatever he's doing, whether it's working. So it's
not just words.
It's not just words. It's actions. They see it as proof that actually, if you do commit and have those guidelines and those boundaries, then you can also do it. And regarding the gangs, every gang has a purpose, whether it's bad or good. So it's a bad ideology, but we have a gang, but our gang's a different gang. Our gang gets up in the morning and we run together. Our gang trains together, and we're all part of a different gang. Our gang's, a positive gang.
Right.
So that's just to echo your thoughts.
Can I bring Paul in, because Paul hasn't spoken yet? Paul, you've heard everything saying. You've heard what Professor Peterson has to say. What resonates with you?
I think as soon as I walked in, I saw the big sign on the wall, and it says pretty much everything we've already said, you know, respect, community, respect for yourself, which I think ties in responsibility.
What about male role models? The importance of a male role model for young men?
Massively.
Did you have that?
So, my mum and dad were married many years. He left when I was 8. And I didn't see him again for like 20 years, so he wasn't around. So, like a lot of people, especially like my generation, sort of had to teach myself how to be a man and try to sort of figure out what it is and what it means and how to sort of conduct myself. So yeah, I mean, there was uncles. I had a granddad, Razors, but he died when I was like 13, which was pretty much hitting puberty. That's right when you need him, you know. So yeah, met up with him when I was 28, like 20 years later. But there was a big gap there. So
what was the consequence of that gap for you? Like, what did it leave you without?
I suppose you don't know what you didn't have. But
right.
I'd say, I don't know, maybe I'd be a bit more assertive, but at the same time, I don't think my particular father would have been a positive impact on my life. Very much of an older generation, interested in other things in terms of very violent, involved with a lot of stuff when he was younger that wouldn't have been a positive impact on my life, and I'm a different person because of it. You know, I've went down a totally different path compared to how he would have probably wanted us to.
So what have you done that's right as far as you're concerned? What's worked for you?
I'm in business. I do a little bit of politics now. I'm interested in a lot more bigger issues. Mm. I always remember a story when I was a child that I was sat reading a book, and I mean, it would have been a picture book, you know, to like as a baby, and my father picked it up and sort of cracked it across my head and went, you know, what are you reading that for? That would have been the environment.
Oh yeah, that's rough, man.
Yeah.
There's the German philosopher Nietzsche said that if you really want to punish someone, you should punish them for their virtues. So you wait till you see them doing something good, and then you hurt them for that.
Yeah.
Right? Brutal, man. So that stuck with you, that.
Well, I don't remember that, but I just know it wouldn't have been a positive outcome. It was affecting us through school. Because I was seeing his actions, him coming home. I was seeing, you know, I was acting violent in school, as like I'm talking infant school, like 5, 6, and I was. But then
What happened to that aggression, Paul? Because Professor Peterson has talked about that the aggression lives within us, and how we learn to channel it and how we learn to control it is important. How did you learn?
So literally, my mum and dad put the fear of God into us after that incident, but it went back over where I was afraid to stick up for myself all through school because I was then scared to fight back, which was ridiculous. And I only sort of got out of that in my 20s, late teens, and I started boxing, funny enough, and doing Thai boxing up in like where I'm from. But yeah.
The thing about anger and aggression is that it inhibits fear. So, like, it's easy. Fear tends to paralyze people and stop them from moving forward. And there's lots of things to be afraid of because you can be hurt and undermined and terrible things can happen to you. And so struggling with that fear in association with vulnerability is a problem that everyone has. And one of the tools that everyone has at their disposal is, well, to have a goal, because that makes a big difference. It means that confronting something terrifying is worthwhile because of what it might produce. But anger as well and aggression also remove fear. They help you overcome it. And so that if you can integrate that into your life, then that becomes determination and implacability and unstoppability and all those things which you don't get without having that aggression integrated. So you said that in your 20s you started to box and to fight, and also to stand up for yourself. Those went together.
Yeah. So like obviously not competitively, but just that confidence of going, well, you know, I think I was just afraid of hurting someone when I was fighting back as a kid, you know, because I was told, you know, don't bully people, like when I was like 5 and 6.
Yeah.
And that, you know, I got to the point where I was bullied all through my teens because of that, and then didn't do anything back.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of talk in schools about not bullying, and it's often very unsophisticated because it doesn't help people decide what the difference is between oppressing someone, say, and aggressing against them and standing up for yourself, or even playing You know, like in my kids' school, there was a rule, this is a bad rule in Canada, is that not only could you not throw a snowball, you couldn't even pick one up, which was a rule I told the children that they were welcome to break. I said, if you want to pick up a snowball and if you can hit a teacher in the back of the head with it, and that'd be just fine with me, but you have to take the punishment if you're willing to do it. But I thought that was just ridiculous beyond belief. You know, the idea that enforced weakness was something equivalent to peaceable coexistence. It's just an insane adage. So why did the boxing and the fighting help you? You said it helped you distinguish, at least in part, between hurting someone and not hurting them. Like if you want to defend yourself, you want to do it with minimal force, you know, and you have to have the confidence to do it. How did the boxing help you figure that out?
I'm unsure. I just know that it gave us more confidence in situations where I would have maybe been a bit, you know, I'm unsure how to describe it, but, you know, a physical confrontation, I still hate confrontation. Yeah. I still hate confrontation. Like, I worked in an industry that was very much lots of conflict, arguing, public Facebooks, and it makes us feel physically sick, and it still does.
Right.
But it helps us on a one-to-one basis deal with that confrontation a bit more than the fact I'm prepared for it and what have you.
Right.
Not that I don't want to come across as someone that I don't even think I can count fights on, you know, 2 or 3, like, in my entire life, but I don't want to seem like I'm sort of some violent man. I'm not. But yeah, I think it was just the confidence.
I want to bring Kevin in at this point, Professor Peterson, because Kevin, tell us about your background.
Okay, so being brief.
As brief as you can, but yeah. I mean, it's you've been to some very dark places, no doubt.
Yeah. So mine's quite similar to actually to the two boxers, but I come from a single parent home, and I came to London at the age of 9, coming from Paris, but both areas in which I grew up in were very predominantly known for violence, poverty. We were really deprived, and that's how we grew up. So with poverty comes crime. With that comes false ideologies, distorted ideologies. So that's how I grew up, essentially. And coming to London, it was really tough because I feel like you just so many things that I've heard now, single parent home, illness. There's certain things I feel that are not, that an individual isn't able to control. But I think the things that you are able to control, you should control fully. But I think that kicks in when something has to happen. So I think it comes from, derives from. Yeah,
what happened to you?
For me,
because you were in a gang.
Yeah.
You were drug dealing.
Yeah. So for me, the reason why I did that was because, as I said, I adopted false ideologies, and I felt like if I can't beat them, then I will have to join them. And in order for me to transition, something had to happen where from that, things like morals could derive from it, principles, discipline.
How did you find out about, like, how did you draw that conclusion? What did you have to experience that taught you that?
So the turning point for me was at the age of 19, after drug dealing at 18. I was invited to a church service, and a lot of people have attachments such as sport, but for me it was faith, because what it did, it gave me a core set of values. So I was traveling with no direction, but with the values that derived from going to church, I had direction. Now I had rules, you know, and I think without rules, you can't really travel with direction.
Yeah, well, there's not a lot of difference between rules and opportunity. It's something that people don't understand very well, because they always feel that rules constrain them and interfere with their freedom. But if the rules are associated with the discipline, then they point you in a direction, and then you have a direction. And like life can be a very dreadful experience without direction. So why do you think church had that effect on you? Because it doesn't on everyone. And why did you keep going?
Yeah, so the first time was because there was a friend of mine who was actually giving a testimony of his life and talking about his transition and saying that faith has been able to make him transition. And I think when you come from a dark place with a certain person, you may tell yourself that you are happy in that place, but you're not. And I think if you can see light at the end of the tunnel through a person that you can resonate with,
Right.
then you will eventually want to be attached to that light. So I think that's what made me transition.
Yeah, well, that's
place.
like one of the things that I think is true for people is that you need someone in your life that is associated with that light at the end of the tunnel. It's very, very difficult to find it yourself. It's very difficult to find it if no one around you can see it. But if you're fortunate, you'll see that somewhere in someone, or parts of it in different people, and then you can put it together. And so what's been the consequence for you? What's changed for you?
So what's changed since changing, so making the transition?
Yeah.
So after making that transition, I was still inadequate due to the fact that I left school with, well, we call it GCSEs here. So I left school with no GCSEs. And so what I had to do is take ownership now. Like you say, like men have to take ownership. I had to take ownership. And from the good morals that I gained and the principles, I actually wanted to live a purposeful life. And so in that, 2 years later, I was able to start a law degree. So I was able to graduate in law. I've been able to speak in various venues and write a book.
Can I just bring Kit in, actually, because Kit's had an interesting story of Professor Peterson, suffered from depression and had suicidal thoughts during his life.
Well, it's really picking up on this idea of like childhood experiences and enforced weakness, really, I suppose. My parents separated as well when I was quite young. I think I was 9 years old at the time. And really what I encountered was a situation of enforced strength, almost. So a family member told me, okay, your dad's not in the picture at the moment. You have to be strong for your mother and your sister. You're the man of the house now, so this is your responsibility. You have to take care of them. And that's a responsibility that I took very, very, very seriously. So really from the ages of, I suppose, about 9 until about 16, I never expressed a negative emotion. I never allowed myself to feel sad, or at least not express sadness or anger or any sort of negativity in the home, because I felt it was my responsibility to carry the weight of everyone else on my shoulders. And that kind of thing takes a very, very long time to deprogram and realise that actually this is sort of part of a narrative that we're told, I feel, as men, that we have a responsibility to be strong and to provide for our families. And really, it's not always the case that we're able to or positioned to, particularly at a young age. And
right, so there was too much for other people in that situation and not enough for you in some sense. The balance wasn't right.
The balance wasn't right, exactly.
Yeah, and it's a lot of responsibility for, I mean, too much responsibility is too much, right? And so you were, and it's interesting because it sounds like no one really also helped you in a sophisticated way distinguish between taking responsibility and still being able to have, well, your own emotions and your own problems.
Exactly.
Because those things don't have to compete.
Yes, no, that's that. I mean, since then, I've obviously learned that that's the case. But at the time, I just didn't have the language or the ability really to process what my role was actually supposed to be. And so I think I took on the most idealized possible version of that role to be, this perfect sort of father figure, really, in the home. And it's such a difficult thing to really talk about and to express, because even looking back at it now, it makes me feel like sort of back in that place in a way. It's very strange. It's
well, it sounds like you must have felt that if anything went wrong in the family, that it was your fault.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely,
and that's
the case,
yeah. Well, there's a difference between fault and responsibility. I mean, bad things happen to people in life, and that isn't necessarily anyone's fault. Sometimes it is, but often it's not. But the trick is to do what you can in the face of that, but not to tear yourself into pieces, because it happens sometimes. Yes. And that's a really tricky thing to get right.
It is. It's a fine balance to strike.
And something very difficult to do when you're 9.
Yes.
And plus you were also struggling with loss.
Yes, with the loss of the family unit and a kind of a grieving process there, which I never really completed until my mid-20s, really, I think. And yeah, it's a very kind of a tenuous position that we find ourselves sometimes, I think.
And have you reconciled that now? Do you think? How?
I reconciled that through a lot of therapy. That was the case. It was a case of a year-long intensive therapy, like sort of day visits to an institution sort of 3 times a week over the course of a year, and that started to put me back together to the point where I could function on a day-to-day basis.
So basically. It started to lift your depression.
Started to lift
what about it was useful particularly?
The ability to disentangle emotions from thoughts, and also being able to give back anger, I suppose, to where it needs to be.
Right. And was that a consequence of having the opportunity to talk?
I think so. Yeah. I think talking is very, very
well.
important.
One of the things that I've noticed in my clinical practice, for example, but also in talking to people, all the people that I've talked to, I guess, in situations something like this, is that, like, people think by talking, and they need someone to listen. And the reason you need to think by talking is because that's how you straighten out your psyche, right? And you do this, precisely what you said, is you start to distinguish emotion from thought, and you put things in proper order. But it's very, very difficult to do that if you don't have someone to listen to you, and that's also associated with this issue about having someone to pay attention to you. You know, you talked about mentoring young people is like one of the best things you can possibly do with young people when you're mentoring is actually listen to them. Because people struggle down the proper path if they have the opportunity to express themselves, but they need someone who's listening and providing some feedback, because otherwise they can't do it alone. It's very difficult to think by yourself.
Yes, yeah, I think that's the thing. To an extent, the personal responsibility for your own happiness and for your own well-being is obviously a large part of it, and I do agree with that. I do think that we all need someone to lean on, and to an extent we need to have that community around us, and really we need to build the communities for ourselves, I think.
Well, it also gives the people around you a role too.
Yes.
If you're doing everything yourself, then there's nothing for them. You know, and that's not so good. It's good to allow people, encourage people to help reciprocally. That's that's really the issue. It's kind of that's the ideal for a family, right? Is that everybody's helping reciprocally, and hopefully everyone is stronger as a consequence. You want that in a friendship as well, if you can manage it. So, you know, the third rule in my book is make friends with the people who want the best for you. You know, and that's part of that reciprocal issue, is you want to look in your life and you want to find that part of you that's moving upward, and then you want to find people who want that part of you that's striving upward to win. And often people are jealous about that, or they're angry because it didn't work out for them, or they're cynical about their life, or they're bitter because they've been hurt, or they've learned that they can get what they want by taking it, even though that only works in the short term. And so then they're not allied with the part of you that wants to move upward. And the only thing you have in life that really is reliable is your desire to move upward, as far as I'm concerned. You've got that under all circumstances. Even when things break apart around you, you still have that. And that's that, you know, that's that relationship between responsibility and meaning that everybody needs to know about.
Tim Samuels, the author, broadcaster, journalist, has been sitting there patiently throughout this, and I think it's great to bring you in at this juncture, actually, as we get towards the final part of this conversation, Tim, because you wrote Who Stole My Spear. Now, you've heard now from various people, Rhodes, don't worry, we will speak to you as well, with interesting things about military service and discipline. Tim, what are your thoughts?
I mean, on the one hand, it's amazing and it's heartwarming, and I'm touched and I'm nodding a lot. I'm kind of in this sort of Churchill back of the car dog nodding the whole time. But at the other side, I'm kind of maddened by the experience that I see in society, where we don't take men seriously. You know, when I, for this station, launched Men's Hour a number of years ago, the response was, what have men got to complain about? You know, people laughing in your face. You know, when I brought my book out, it was like, oh, God, you know, what are men whinging about? And it's absolutely infuriating that because men are seen, because there is a notion of a patriarchy, and therefore all men are dominant, and men are some monolithic block, and therefore we all have access to everything. It's an absurdity. You know, the male experience is as individual as the female experience. And sure, there are some men at the top in business and in government who are doing very well and are overrepresented. But I've met...
And academia.
Yeah. Well, less about men getting into universities now than they used to.
That's very true.
They're a
Well,
minority.
actually, the worst educational outcomes at GCSE are white working class boys.
Exactly. So but there's this kind of lazy notion, to be generous, out there that everything's okay for men. And the men I've met writing a book, travelling, doing documentaries, sitting here today, I'm sure, akin to the people Jordan met, men are having a really hard time at the moment, and it's incredibly powerful and potentially toxic when men and boys don't feel like they can be boys and men. And in my experience, it gets channeled inwards and that brings about depression and anxiety. And if that's something you've ever had contact with in your life, you wouldn't wish it on anyone else in the world. Or it seems to get expressed outwards in this kind of anger of the other, whether it's different minorities or immigration or women. And that is incredibly fertile ground for driving radical politics. You look at the rise of Donald Trump in America. To some extent, more men voted for Brexit than not over here. You look at the far right in Europe. And there's this male anger. But at the same time as this, people say, oh, what have men got to complain about? And if you don't take men seriously, there is a sort of societal time bomb there. And it's going to be bad for men. It's going to be bad for women. And it's just about listening to
you
the
don't
guys.
take them seriously if you think about them as men. That's the problem with that view of the world that places everyone into their group identity. Because then it's, all men are the same, which is, of course, absolutely preposterous. It's the same doctrine that drives racism. All members of Group X are the same, and here's their negative traits. It's a complete abdication of responsibility for thinking. And the truth of the matter is that people in general have difficult lives, because we're all mortal and we're all prone to physical illness and mental illness and disappointment and all of those things. People struggle through life and need to be encouraged. And the idea that somehow men don't have problems is tangled, as you pointed out, with this doctrine of patriarchal dominance, which I think is the most appalling ideological idea that's emerged in the last 40 years. There's nothing about it that's useful. Having said that, hierarchies can obviously become corrupt, and it's necessary to keep an eye on that. And sometimes they can become corrupt because they're dominated by people who use nothing but power. But to think that that's what all men do all the time when they're striving to be competent, and that's the fundamentally appropriate description of our entire history, it's absolutely inexcusable. And it's certainly an unbelievably widespread doctrine in the universities.
But what's kind of heartwarming at the same time is hearing young guys and men being able to emote and express how they feel and not bottle, which I think, we haven't done ourselves the power of good over the years by men not being able to sort of say, actually, I need help, or things aren't great, or I'm not feeling $1 million, but, I can still be a man. And, just hearing from some of the guys today and that sense of honesty, I think is so crucial for our mental health. It is to go and seek help and to say, I might not feel great, but there are people who can help me through this, and there are ways around that. So I think, it's incumbent on men and boys to kind of see vulnerability as a problem.
Well, we could also say that, there's a difference between seeking help and guidance, because a lot of the narratives we heard today are guidance narratives. It's like, I'm lost, or the pathway I'm on isn't as productive as it could be. I need to seek out someone who's got a better offer. And that's not even so much help as it is part of the proclivity to seek out adventure. Because you guys have been on an adventure. You come to the gym, it changes your whole life. You travel the world. You've had a spectacularly successful young career. You've mentored all these young people. That's advantage and opportunity. And to seek guidance is to exactly seek that out. And it's different than looking for help, because help implies, it implies to some degree that you're in a position of weakness, and that's different than going out to seek your adventurous pathway forward. One of the things that people don't understand, too, it's not laid out very clearly, is that a virtuous path, so that would be one that's oriented to some higher order goal, is a lot more difficult and requires a lot more courage and discipline and strength than an impulsive criminal path, even though there's a certain romance that's associated with that. That's probably better than hiding in your mother's basement, but that doesn't mean it's the highest order way that you can possibly be. And so part of orienting yourself in the world is to heed that call to adventure and to try to make the adventure as difficult as you can manage and as productive in consequence as you can manage.
And it feels, if I can just say one more thing, that it's got to change with school. So much of the schooling system seems to play against boys, and by the time boys are so many more times more likely to be kicked out or suffer from ADD or that sort of thing. And there is something about the modern schooling system which doesn't suit boys properly, and that's got to change.
Part of that ADD proclivity is the overwhelming tendency of a fairly large minority of boys to need a lot of boisterous activity and play. And if that's not allowed, then it's manifested in attention deficit disorder. There's very good work done on that at the neurobiological level. And the drugs that are used to suppress ADD symptoms also suppress play in animals. And so a lot of that, what's called pathology, ADD pathology, is a consequence of putting boys in environments that are absolutely not suited for them, especially for the ones that are more active. And then that's turned into some sort of medical condition. It's really not good.
You say that, Professor Peterson, because I interviewed someone whose son of Jamaican origin was told that there was ADHD in a school here in the UK. This child then subsequently moved back to Jamaica and is a straight A student. There was no change. It was just that energy that he had was immediately classed and put in a box here, and it was just normal there.
Well, what's normal about requiring very young boys, young people for that matter, to sit without moving for multiple hours in a day? Like, who in the world ever thought that was a good idea? There's nothing about that that's a good idea.
Well, Rhodes, we haven't heard from you, and it's important that we do, because it's quite interesting about discipline and where you found discipline in your life. And the military helped.
So I come from Cyprus, where we've had compulsory military service there for the past 60 years or so, I think. So it's something that you grow up knowing, and it's not imposed to you, but everyone is aware of it, that once you finish high school, you go into there. I wasn't particularly worried about it. I knew that I was a very anti-establishment person and did not have great taste for hierarchies, so I was kind of worried about that part. But although most people think that the military is associated with discipline or structure, there's an equally chaotic element to it. So when you go through basic training, there's an artificially created chaotic environment imposed on you, so that potentially when you go into warfare, you'll know how to cope with it. And I understood that I could thrive in a chaotic environment, or as you would say, with regards to the 5 personality traits, I was very low on neuroticism when put into that environment. And it also might have something to do with being quite an open person. So by nature, I'm very impulsive. But at the same time, it was almost a revelation to understand that out of this chaotic environment, structure could arise and meaning could arise, regardless of your political perspective. So whether you don't like the function of the military itself. At the same time, I grew up in a deeply religious family, and I grew up rejecting religion from a very young age. As Professor Richard Dawkins would say, I became a militant atheist. And I grew up, Greek is my native language, and I was taught ancient Greek at school, so I was exposed to the classics, and that influenced my decisions in rejecting religion and the idea of God itself. But then I found your lectures, Dr. Peterson, on the biblical series. And suddenly I realized that it's not all bad, and maybe the same work that Joseph Campbell did with regards to articulating the hero's journey, maybe that's what the people that wrote and edited the Bible tried to do. And they were trying to give you a meaning, and they were trying to convey a message beyond just belief in God. And like Kevin said, meaning can be found in religion. But I think it can be found in more than one ways. There is not necessarily the need to be deeply religious and adhere to the principles and doctrines of a particular church or religion just to find meaning in those writings.
Yeah, well, you found it in various ways, right? And partly in the military, but partly what those religious stories are trying to relate, to the degree that they can, is that each person has a destiny that's actually crucially important, and that in the pursuit of that destiny, they start to see what is associated with the highest orders of meaning. One of the reasons that I believe that each person should take their place in life, and that this is so important for each individual, is that we all have that potential residing within us. And it has the possibility of making the world more like hell or more like heaven. And to the degree that we can have the courage and the faith to manifest that in a positive way, then we tilt everything in a positive direction. And that's not some naive sort of namby-pamby positive direction where everyone's nice to each other all the time. That's like the ongoing march of civilization that makes the world, that feeds people and cures disease and helps take care of children and keeps suffering under bay and keeps malevolence in check. And that's all part of that divine capacity that people have. And religious systems are an attempt to communicate that across the centuries. And, it's not an easy thing to divine from them, but it's a very important thing to understand. And I really do believe that you leave a hole in the world if you don't fill it, if you don't fill the space around you with the destiny that's part and parcel of the best part of you. And it's not good.
We're running out of time. And I kind of wanted to end with asking you about meaning. And what meaning do you think your life has?
I think that it's associated with vision first. You have to have a sense of, you have to have two senses. You have to have a sense of how terrible the world is and could be. And then you have to decide that you're going to move away from that as much as you possibly can, at least to move away from that. And then to formulate... Is that your daily? Is that your day by day? Is that your incremental progress that some may see, well, that's not trivial, trying to move away from fascism and all kinds of things. Well,
that's not
it's
but
good
what's
to
your
have
truth? What's your
it's
truth?
good to have a conceptualization of
Yes.
hell.
Yes.
And to be properly terrified of that, and to understand that that's a place that you can put yourself and drag other people into, and that it's sufficiently real, and that's the proper message of the 20th century. And then to think about how you might improve yourself incrementally so that that probability decreases, and then you can start to develop a vision of what things might look like if they were better, and strive towards that. And partly what I'm doing now is, for me, trying to clarify the relationship between meaning and responsibility, which I think is, of all the things that I've been talking to people about, probably the most useful, to help people understand that you need a meaning in your life to buttress yourself against the tragedy and the malevolence and the betrayal, and that you find that fundamentally in adoption of responsibility. Now that can become excessive, if it's too one-sided and you don't see a part for other people to play. But fundamentally you need to carry a weight that's Sisyphus, and that weight should be something that you truly regard as worth carrying. It justifies the sacrifices. It orients yourself in life. It provides you with a sense of meaning. It constrains your anxiety, gives you a certain amount of dignity, and it puts the world, it moves the world forward in a better manner. And I do believe that each of us every day decide with every decision whether we're going to make the world a better place or a worse place. And so that's meaningful for me. That's the essence of what I believe meaning to be, the instinct that orients you towards proper action in the world. It's the most real thing there is.
Thank you, Professor Peterson.